that was the overwhelming thing, was just pure survival in that first year, because it was not at all certain that it was going to survive. I actually brought in a development consultant that I had known from another place, and because we had no development director, and talked about a complicated message. You have no tax exempt status. Oops, sorry. How are you gonna raise money?
I had such a great time chatting with today's guest, who's actually a long-time colleague and person I've admired for so many years. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrary's Conversations, and we are chatting today with Lois Robinson. And Mitch Moehring, who helps with production of these podcasts, he suggested I reach out to Lois. He was on a gig with her. He said, this person's really interesting. She is the executive director for the Shreveport Symphony, and she's a working bassist, and she used to work for the Louisiana Philharmonic right after Hurricane Katrina. So I reached out to Lois, and I all of a sudden realized, I've known Lois for about 20 years. She was executive director of the Civic Orchestra of Chicago back when I was in the Civic Orchestra. So we talk about that, and we dig into everything that she's done in her role as executive director in the Shreveport Symphony. They were in a really dire situation. She came on board and really turned things around. All that and much more in this great conversation. Thank you so much also to Robertson & Sons Violins, Upton Bass, and D'Addario Strings. More on them later, but let's dig into this conversation with Lois Robinson. So, wow, it's great to talk to you, Lois.
Well, yes. When he mentioned your name, I thought, Jason Heath? I know a Jason Heath from a long time ago.
It has been, because you were at Civic, those were the years I was in Civic. It was right around...
Yeah. So it was right around 99, 2000.
Yeah, exactly. So almost 20 years ago.
Pushing 20 years ago. So obviously you're getting good work working for the San Francisco Symphony. That's great. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, just doing a little subbing here. We moved from Chicago to San Francisco a couple of years ago. My wife is finishing her radiology residency and in San Francisco. So I'm out here too, and get all sorts of interesting new opportunities.
It sounds like you've got quite a bit of teaching going on too. That's good.
Yeah. No, things are working out well. So it's fun to land somewhere new, totally different part of the country, which I know you've done too.
Yeah, quite a lot. I was married when I was working at Civic, but my husband is from New Orleans, the New Orleans area. Oh. So we moved down there to work for the Louisiana Philharmonic after Katrina.
Okay.
Which was an interesting challenge, but and then I was recruited from there to come up here.
So that's okay. I was wondering because I was looking at the years that you were at. So that was. Can you remind me when Katrina was? Was that 2005?
Katrina was 2005.
Okay.
And we started working for the LPO in 2006.
Okay.
And I was there for 5 years, and then came up here in 2011.
Okay. Wow. And you're playing bass in the orchestra too, right? In Shreveport?
I am, and it was something that just developed. It's kind of interesting because moving around a lot, it's very hard to maintain freelance connections, and keep working, keep playing work. And when I got up here, I didn't play for the first year at all, and then the second year. It became clear how short this region was of bass players, and we were in a bind. And so I played that concert, and then I played one more, and then over the years, it's just developed that I'm now playing everything.
Okay.
So, including chamber concerts, I'm just playing everything, operas. It was totally unexpected, really. I just came up here to be the executive director, but. We're also playing the whole little circuit we've got here too. So it's this month, for instance, I'm working every week. Playing.
Really? So I'd love to know what the circuit is. Like if you're in Shreveport, what are some of the other orchestras people might play in?
Well, there's it's mostly kind of north of here. There's El Dorado, Arkansas,
Okay.
and Texarkana, and Marshall. So they're all 1 to 2 hours away, and use a lot of the Shreveport Symphony players. I think lots of places have a little circuit like that. Like Dallas has a whole bunch of little orchestras like that.
Yep. Chicago has a similar setup, and Bay Area too. Yeah.
So even a little city like Shreveport has its own little circuit. So.
Wow. And I'm trying to think if I've played in a decent number of orchestras these days. Have I ever played in an orchestra where the executive director was playing? Are you an anomaly in terms of that? I'm trying to think if there's another person who does that.
Well, I have known it to happen occasionally. I'd say it's probably more common in smaller orchestras.
Right.
It's still not exactly common. I would say it is relatively common for executive directors to have some musical background, to have played an instrument at one point. In most cases, they stopped playing a while back, and just because time didn't allow, or they just didn't have the right opportunities to play. I have to say, I mean, I wasn't playing much in New Orleans. I played some, but not much, and it didn't play in the main orchestra at all. But I played some in the area. But it's I asked my board president when I first started to play if this was at all disturbing to him, and he said absolutely not. Partly that's because the Shreveport Symphony had gone through a lot of issues in the past that related pretty directly to a lack of trust between the administration and the orchestra.
Okay.
And I think they felt like if I was there, on the ground, that it would help to build trust, that they would believe that I knew what they were talking about. And I think it has actually worked out that way.
I can totally see it making a huge impact. I mean, like here you are, you're sitting in the bass section. You're either turning pages or getting pages, marking parts. Trying to play in tune with everybody. Like they talk about boots on the ground.
Yeah. And if the light's bad or the air's hot, I know it. I'm there with them.
Yeah.
If the guest conductor is making a hash of it, I know it. Which doesn't happen very often, by the way. But just all those things, and I think so. Our the Shreveport Symphony. I'm not sure if you were ever aware. There's probably no reason you would have been. Went through a very long strike between 2008 and 2010, almost 2 full years off, and that was that could have been a fatal event. So I think they actually chose me as ED over more of a revenue person, I think, because they realized they needed to have somebody that was able to communicate effectively with the orchestra, and that it just wasn't going to work unless they had somebody that was able to bridge the gap a little bit more than it had been bridged before.
Yeah, I know a bit about that. I do remember reading about that strike, and I do have a friend, former colleague named Jeremy Bogoyos, who used to play in Shreveport, and he's gone on and done many things. He's teaching at University of Nebraska, Omaha right now.
Yeah, I actually know his wife, Sarah.
Oh, get out of here. Okay, small world.
Because my husband is an orchestra librarian.
Oh, and, of course.
And he was working at Lyric Opera when we were in Chicago, and Sarah came to be a 1-year sub when he took a sabbatical.
Yeah.
So
strangely
enough, I've met Jeremy, but I've never played with him. But
well, we're all once removed from like everybody else in this music world. I think, right?
It is such a small world. I mean, you said small world. It's smaller than small. It's just tiny.
Okay.
There's almost nowhere you can turn where you haven't met somebody who's met somebody else.
Yeah. Wow. Did you grow up in Chicago?
No, I grew up in Rochester, New York.
Okay.
And then I went to Rochester, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I went to college in Cleveland.
Okay.
And
Okay.
college and law school in Cleveland, and then I practiced for a while in Cleveland. Then I, after about 8 years of that, embarked on orchestra management as a reasonable way to combine those two things.
Okay. Did you always, like when you were in high school getting ready to go to Cleveland, were you thinking law school? Were you thinking music school? What were you thinking of trajectory wise? Probably not executive directorship, but maybe.
No, not at all. No, nobody was more surprised than I am. No, I was thinking music. But as I got to the end of my 4 years in Cleveland, I felt like I was not going to be able to play at a level that would make me happy, which, by the way, was propaganda. And I'm sorry that I listened to it, because it was not that I'm sorry about the way things turned out. I just realized in retrospect that I was sort of being sold a bill of goods by the conservatory atmosphere that says you can only be happy if you're playing in a top 10 orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
Because I now really truly believe that is not true. That you can that we're trying to create something called Pathways here in Shreveport, which in my mind is more about redefining success.
Oh,
success, not allowing yourself to feel successful even if you're not in the Cleveland Orchestra.
mm-hmm.
And there was so much of that when I was in school, and I would imagine it's still out there. And everybody wants to shoot high, I understand, but allow yourself to feel successful if you've managed to put together a decent living that you're happy at,
Mm-hmm.
and not feel bad about it. Because I just think that was so prevalent when I was in school, and so I thought, well, I can't do that, so I'm just going to switch altogether. And I went to law school.
Okay.
But even as that was happening, I was playing in the Fort Wayne Philharmonic all the way through school. And then I wound up playing a lot when I was in Cleveland, because I practiced in Cleveland and I knew people already from school, so I played a lot. So for me,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead. Go ahead.
For me, it was. I actually, in a way, enjoy playing more when it's not, when the pressure is off of having to, achieve the big ambition.
Mm-hmm. I understand that. Yeah, that's beautiful. What kind of law did you practice?
I actually worked for the ACLU.
Oh, okay.
And then for a small firm that had been associated with them. So, yeah. So it was some employment discrimination, some personal injury, and after the ACLU time, the ACLU was obviously, private clients, prison conditions of all things.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time behind bars when I was a young lawyer.
Wow. I wonder how that. Sorry, jumping around here, but I think it's a super interesting path that you've had. Have you applied? I'm sure you have, but have you applied some of those skills that you developed as an ACLU lawyer in prisons and such? Have you used some of those skills as an executive director? Are there any that you can think of?
Well, I mean, I've definitely used the legal skills
of course,
as an executive director. I mean, I think our negotiations have been a lot smoother here.
Yeah.
Than they had been for a long time, partly because I know what's in CBAs in general. I don't fight against what's normal in CBAs, so I don't spend time on that. But we also had, when I first got here post-strike, and there had been very little administration for a couple of years, there were some pretty significant problems with the IRS that needed to be worked out. And we had no money for a lawyer, so it was a good thing at that moment that I was able to handle most of that myself without spending money on a lawyer. And,
sure.
So you never know what's going to come up, and I think just the general analytical way of looking at things is useful.
Okay.
So I've had some direct applicability, but in a broader sense, I think just the analytical and logical way of thinking and the ability to have a grasp of detail.
Yeah.
Our budget is, we're not that big an orchestra. We're only about $1.3 or $4 million a year, but still, the level of detail that you have to maintain is really quite substantial. On my finance committee, I only have lawyers, judges, and accountants because nobody else could tolerate the level of detail that's in there.
Okay, wow.
I mean, even the summary of the summary makes people's eyes glaze over. But if you're going to control, expense and revenue, you really have got to be able to have a mastery of that level of detail. And we, so far, knock on wood, have been able to make that go. I'm trying for a sixth year in a row of balanced budget. So.
Well, so congratulations on that. I saw that online. Multiple years of balanced budget that many orchestras cannot claim that.
Well, yes, I tell people in other businesses that you might not think this is really all that significant, but in the orchestra world, I promise it's big news.
Yes.
6 years, 5 years, 6 years in a row in the black. It's been a fight every year, but we've managed to do it, and with the help of the board, of course.
Yeah.
So, but again, I feel like if I have to think about it, I really feel like our bigger achievement, even than that, is being able to have a very significant amount of harmony between the constituencies of the organization. I mean, that's what I really feel like the biggest achievement has been in the time here.
Well,
and I think that is largely because I have got some background that does speak to the various constituencies.
Yeah, on the various, on all sides. I mean, it sounds like as a musician, as a lawyer, as someone who's worked with. I mean, I'm sure that walking in post Katrina to the Louisiana Philharmonic, that there must have been some issues to tackle there. I would guess.
Well, I mean, there was, this was 2006, and really the recovery had just begun.
Yeah,
we didn't have a hall for 2 more years after I started. We were the itinerant orchestra, and to a certain degree, that orchestra has remained. They have more of a home again now, but the itinerant habits they started, they're still doing because they found it worked for them. So It was an interesting thing about that. But there was just nothing there. I was really mainly I was first the artistic administrator and then the general manager there. So I wasn't the ED there. I was mostly in the artistic and operations side.
I remember that. I don't remember if it was called the Orpheum, but I went and saw a rehearsal there when I was visiting pre-Katrina, and that hall was taken out by the hurricane, right? Their primary concert hall?
Yes, it was completely, put out of action. And they just actually moved back into it last season. And so it was, I think 11 years after the hurricane that it took for that hall to be restored. In the meantime, one of the municipal performing arts halls was what came back first.
Okay.
But yeah, the Orpheum, that's a huge long story. Actually, it was sold for next to nothing to a developer who took out a bunch of loans and had a series of sham transactions to take out still more money.
Okay.
It was ugly.
Okay.
It was ugly. So eventually, I think the Tipitina Foundation bought it and are managing it now. So, but at least it's back in commission. It's 11 years. It was just sitting there rotting away, which is a shame.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear that it's back, and what a set of challenges that must have been. And then to come to Shreveport.
Hey, Jason, this is Barry Green calling, the bass player. from Cincinnati and then California, and now I'm back in Cincinnati, and we're having a lovely snowstorm right now on the 24th of March. Are you kidding me? Springtime. Anyway, I'm just checking in to talk about how cool not just Diodario strings are, but the entire organization. I mean, like Lyris and all of the bosses there, they are so supportive of the arts, of music, what they do for music, the music programs around the world with the foundation, and supporting the artists and the many clinics that I have done as well for them and through them and with their support. They are the most amazing human beings. So when I play my Diodario strings, I not only share music sounds, but I'm spreading the Diodario message of benevolence and good fortune and dedication to music. I've always enjoyed the Diodario strings because they're so universally cool. They work for orchestra playing, they work for solo playing. They have so many models that are possible, from a hybrid string for an orchestra player or a solo bass player. You get a little more edge with the hybrid. The mediums are great for most instruments, but I find that sometimes the instrument, not the strings, but the instrument needs a little help in the certain registers, and therefore it's like a prescription. It's kind of like a person. I mean, like if you're fat or if you're skinny, you're going to wear clothes that make you look better. And so if your bass has a nice high register and needs some help on the bottom, then you want something that helps enhance the bottom. So find the clothes. The cool thing about Diodario is that they have a lot of clothes in their closet. And so we're going to take all those Diodario strings out of the closet and fit it on our unique basses and get them all to look really, really cool. All right, Jason, I hope this is helpful, and I know Diodario is helpful to the world. Bye.
After 2 years of being on strike, and I'm sure I have lots of friends in the Minnesota Orchestra, and talking to them about what that effect was like, being on strike for so long. I mean, it must have just been, talk about as big a challenge as you can face. So, like, what did you, what were some of the first things you did when you got there as ED for Shreveport? Like, how did you start rebuilding and moving forward?
Well,
big question. Sorry.
But it's just like you'd think that the biggest thing that was going on at that time was recovering from the strike, but actually, my first months there, I was discovering the full magnitude of the problems with the IRS.
Oh, okay.
Which I won't go into it in any detail, except to say that our tax exempt status was lost.
Oh dear.
We didn't have a tax exempt status for most of my first year in the job, and owed the IRS in the neighborhood of $200,000 in penalties and interest.
Wow.
And that's what I was working on, those things. Okay. And we were also just trying to put the concerts on with what was at that point still a skeleton crew. So that was the overwhelming thing, was just pure survival in that first year, because it was not at all certain that it was going to survive. I actually brought in a development consultant that I had known from another place, and because we had no development director, and talk about a complicated message. You have no tax exempt status. Oops, sorry. How are you gonna raise money? So there was the principal, and one of his partners came in and worked more intensively with us. I found out later that the two of them had a bet on whether we were going to make it or not.
Oh, wow.
I mean, one of them literally betted against us.
Oh no!
That's how bad it was. I mean, it was really quite serious. But I think the musicians they had actually settled the strike and had an interim CBA that lasted through my first year. So I think there was definitely a consensus between the musicians and the board that they wanted to pull it out of the fire. I mean, it was honestly really in the fire. So that motivation was already there. Mm-hmm. I think without it, the person betting against us would have won the bet. Okay. But there was definitely, the musicians were aware of what was going on, with the IRS, and it was everybody realized that it was a time to just sort of not push the envelope, but just try to let it settle down to survive. Mm-hmm. And so we made it through, and we had a little bit of a deficit the first year, but given and we had lost our main community foundation grant because there was no audit, and it was just a whole series of things happening. So we had a little bit of a deficit that year, but after the next year after that is when we started balancing the budget. The first budget that I actually created and executed, we were able to balance. Yeah, because I started in August, so the budget, the train was already on the tracks for that season, and it was, I had a lot less control over that, but after that initial thing, I think I felt like my most important mission was to restore trust. Mm-hmm. And I think that applied not only between the musicians and the administration, but also between the community and the orchestra, because there had been a long period of turbulence with the orchestra preceding this strike, and that was partly because the orchestra had grown quite significantly in the 90s to the place where their budget in real terms was at least twice as big as it is now.
Really?
In inflation adjusted terms. Mm-hmm. So and that was partly because there was an angel. I mean, the story is familiar in many places. There was an angel that used to write the check, whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And when that person went away, it was just not practical to raise the amount of money they needed to raise. And so it was a period of shrinkage through the 2000s, and in that time they spent down their endowment, and that was something that was pretty unforgivable to the people in town who had given money to that endowment. Right. Thinking it was an endowment as opposed to general cash. I mean, they didn't do anything illegal; they got permission to do it, but it was one of those things that some of the folks, the most prominent people in town that had been involved with that went away, and they went away mad.
Right.
And I'm still, some of those, we're still working to get them back, and it's nearly 20 years later. Almost that same 20 years between the times we saw each other, in fact, because it was right around the year 2000, 2001 that this happened. So anyway, I really felt like that was kind of job one, was to just restore trust. In the first year after we had a balanced budget, we went around and sat down with as many people as we could. I called it the goodwill tour. And just to say, we're here and it's okay. It's not a crisis. The sky is not falling. And because the message had been for so long that the sky was falling. And you hear that enough, and you think, well, that's not where I'm putting my money.
Yeah. Right. Nobody wants to fund this perpetual like rolling crisis along.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's exactly I think how it felt, because that crisis had been rolling for 10 full years.
Yeah.
And so I think it's finally. This is my 7th year here. I think it's finally settling down to where I don't hear somebody saying, "Oh, I understand the symphony's in trouble." I haven't heard that for about a year now, but I was hearing it for at least 5 years. It's like it's so hard to unring that bell. It's just. So anybody who's having problems, I encourage them not to publicize those problems to excess, because even if you get by today's crisis, tomorrow you're going to be sorry you made such a deal of it.
That's a good point. And with the internet, like you search for an orchestra. Like I'll just use Elgin Symphony as example, though it's probably not true. You type in Elgin Symphony. First thing is their website. Second thing is Elgin in deep crisis. Blah blah blah. Like,
I know. I read that. I saw that. Fortunately, they're. I don't think they've had a long history of difficulties, but they did also grow quite a bit.
Right.
I did play there some, I think, before you did too, right? But I think it was before you did.
Well, actually, I was thinking about that before today. I think we may have both subbed in on a concert together, like right around 2000. Were you doing that while you were at Civic?
I was. So who knows? We might have.
Maybe.
We might have.
But wow. So, like as an executive director, that's sort of probably like a similar role to being like a principal or something, where like a lot of people end up recognizing you, and you're maybe in the grocery store and someone's like, "Oh, I hear the symphony's in trouble." What would you say when somebody, and I guess you're not getting that much, maybe a little now, but like, what do you tell someone in the community when they ask that question? Like, or they make that comment, "Oh, I hear the symphony's going through tough times."
Well, yeah, it's funny you mentioned the grocery store, because in a town of this size, I seriously can't go to the grocery store without seeing somebody that recognizes me.
Yeah.
This is not a figurative example. This is a literal example.
Right.
But when somebody would say that, I would just say, there certainly were issues, but it's under control now. It's work. It's always hard work. It's never going to be easy to make this go. It wasn't easy last year. It won't be easy next year. There's always a challenge. That's something new that comes up. But I guess it's sort of like show business in general. There's always, once you lick one thing, another thing pops up that you have to come up with. And so I don't want to give people the impression that we're in clover and it's easy, but it's under control. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I guess what I also said to people in the Goodwill Tour is we have the ingredients in place for stability. We have a 3-year collective bargaining agreement, which, gives us predictability. We have a stable music director. I've been here now for several years, and I'm starting to know people. Like, I know who's married and who's son and daughter, and, that kind of stuff that just takes a while to figure out, how people are related to each other. Yeah. But, that's it. It's not that it ever makes it easy, because it just never is. And the other thing about an orchestra is if you turn your back on it for even a minute, the expenses will run out of control.
I'm sure.
I think that in one sense, financially, it was helpful for me to have come from an artistic administration background, because I understand, the implications of doing Petrushka.
Right.
It's like, if they say Petrushka, I immediately think quadruple wins.
Yes.
Money. Lots of money. And so we're able, the music director and I are able to have, relatively constructive conversations where we say, okay, this is sort of the target instrumentation. What can we do that makes sense within that instrumentation? And so it's helped us to keep the costs from just running away. As I said, the 1 year that they really spent down in the endowment, I have to tell you, in this town, I don't know how they spent that much money. I think they had Itzhak Perlman, they had Miss America, they did all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Which was it's not like anybody was going to the Bahamas, with the endowment, but they were just thinking, oh, these things are all cool. This is what we need to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the world is full of cool things. And it's like a candy shop out there, and you want to reach for it, but you need to realize that the compromise is not a dirty word, because you have to do it in order to make things balance.
Yeah, interesting. I read, and I don't know necessarily agree or disagree with the book. I read Norman Lebrecht's "Who Killed Classical Music." I don't know if you've checked that book out before, but he has a one thing I remember him talking about, like how orchestras sometimes get into trouble is big name soloists and that sort of thing. The sticker price of somebody like Itzhak Perlman, and how the fear that the audience won't come unless that quote unquote marquee name is there. I'm sure that must be something that orchestras struggle with all the time.
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting because in with the demise of the record labels,
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot less ability for anybody but the very, very top names to have any draw.
Sure.
It used to be you walked into Tower Records and they had cardboard cutouts of somebody who they were hyping
Mm-hmm.
to sell records. That whole machine has disappeared, and so essentially, apart from the very top handful of names, nobody knows anybody anymore.
Exactly.
So it's very hard for you to have a hook that is a person, unless they have some sort of local connection.
Mm-hmm. So
you're left with hooks being composers or works, largely. We, I am very, again, conservative, not necessarily politically, but, in terms of finances, if we're going to spend more money on something, I have to be able to make the numbers work and say, yes, we have a reasonable chance of either not losing money or bringing in some contribution to the bottom line. Because you always have overhead. Profit is the wrong word to use always in relation to an orchestra event. It's whether it takes away, it increases overhead or contributes to overhead.
Yeah.
And so, so the whole kind of name issue is, for an orchestra like ours, has actually kind of come and gone, because there's no way we can afford the names anymore.
Yeah.
Except if we have a specific sponsor for a specific thing, we can't. The names are completely gone, because it's just only those very few names. Even if somebody like Andre Watts would have been, there just isn't enough draw.
Yeah.
You can get somebody who can do a very, very fine job for $5,000 to $10,000, and nobody knows who they are, but they're going to do a very fine job. Really, really an unexceptionable job. Just it's not like you would hear that and think, wow, okay, I understand what compromise we've made. No, right. You really wouldn't. And so the person that costs $20,000 or $30,000 will also do a very fine job, and nobody will know who they are. And so there is literally no reason for us to spend the $20,000 or $30,000.
Yeah.
As opposed to the $5,000 to $10,000. I mean, and this has been, again, I think this has been the biggest kind of sea change in the whole artistic administration business is that the names just, except for tier one orchestras, almost nobody is choosing to afford them anymore.
Okay. Wow. This episode is brought to you by Robertson and Sons Violins. For more than 40 years, over 4 decades, Robertson and Sons has specialized in providing the highest quality stringed instruments and bows to collectors, professional musicians, music educators, and students of all ages. Their modern facility, which is totally beautiful, by the way, if you're ever able to make it out to Albuquerque, New Mexico, I highly recommend it. They have a recital hall that they use not only for performances, but it's available to their clients. So if you want to try out a fine pedigree bass or even a student bass or anything in between, you can go in that recital hall. I've had the chance to do that. Totally amazing. I'm like a kid in a candy store when I'm down there at Robertson's. Check them out online at robertsonsviolins.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Upton Bass String Instrument Company, a company that I have been such a fan of over the years. Gary and Eric and all the good folks at Upton, they do extraordinary work. They've been at it for a long time, and it has been so much fun to watch them evolve over the years. And a question they get asked a lot is, what's the difference between their Bohemian model bass and their standard model basses? And basically what it boils down to is they come from the same basic outline, but there's much more customization available in a Bohemian bass. So Upton standard basses basically look like each other. They're either laminate, hybrid, or carved, but they're similar in their form, while you can get your Bohemian bass customized if you want hat peg tuners, if you want all sorts of other details. That's the bass you can customize. And if you haven't been to the Upton website recently, they're constantly adding new videos, new photos, new descriptions, and every bass has a story. And I love following along with these stories. Visit them at uptonbass.com, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast. What about, and you're mentioning like drawing the audience in, like through pieces, composers, and again, big, huge questions, but things that I've certainly thought about. Some just like drawing in an audience in general. Like, how the heck do you get those people in the seats? Again, apologies for the huge question, but I mean, one thing maybe back in the day, or with a group like San Francisco or something, you put down one of those names and they come in. But like, how do you hook people in Shreveport or Elgin or wherever? Like, in terms of programming, marketing the concerts, like what works here in 2018, or what are you seeing? What are some methods that you see working here in 2018?
Well, as you say, it's a huge question.
I know. I'm sorry.
And one that is not. Whenever you think you know the answer, then fate slaps you down.
Right. Totally.
And demonstrates that you don't necessarily know the answer. Of course, communities are different. Some communities are more adventurous than other communities. I would say how I've mostly approached it in my this job and my last job in New Orleans is to try to find a mix that works. That I used to say the music director gets at least one marketing loser a year. Something is not going to sell.
Right. I like that. That's great.
but it has to be there for the balance of the whole season. And the other thing to keep in mind is that orchestras are still highly dependent on subscription revenue. So and what makes a subscription sell is not necessarily the same thing as what will sell single tickets.
Right.
So a subscription, I think, needs to have a high degree of balance and variety in it. It doesn't want to be all Beethoven all the time. But you can't have no Beethoven.
Right.
You've
Exactly.
got to have a little bit of you've got to represent different points of view. And of course, the music directors generally want to play or want to program something else all the time. They want to program something else besides the greatest hits. But the audience wants to hear some of those greatest hits. You just don't want to do only greatest hits, because only greatest hits eventually gets boring.
Yeah.
So it's a very hard, and you also have very differing opinions in your audience. I mean, now that I'm out front, hearing from the audience, there's a large, disparity of opinion. So maybe one something that has more. We did Bartók Concerto for Orchestra a few years ago, and some people loved it, but a lot of people said, "Oh, that's too contemporary for me. I can't stand it."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Bartók Concerto for Orchestra.
Yeah,
you think we're past that? No.
Right.
No.
Well, we had that in Elgin. I remember we did The Rite of Spring, and I'm thinking, who doesn't love The Rite of Spring? And it was like very tepid applause in the audience. I'm thinking, what? But okay, sure, it's more contemporary than Eroica, but still,
Yeah, and so that's anyway, from a subscription point of view, we definitely try to have a sense of overall balance in it, that we'll have sort of something for everyone, and then from a single ticket point of view, you just say, okay, well, we know that they're not all going to sell the same, mm-hmm. and you can't. It's not reasonable to even think you're going to have every concert sell the same in single tickets. So it's more about having some concerts that you think are going to do better for one reason or another, because there's a bigger soloist, or you've got Beethoven's Fifth on there, or Tchaikovsky Fourth, and then others, like, for instance, I have to say, with apologies to the last generation, Brahms and Schumann don't sell single tickets anymore. Mm-hmm. Who knew, right? Yeah. They just don't. Subscribers want them, but they don't sell single tickets.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
The Russians are much more dominant in kind of the single ticket race.
That's interesting
enough.
Totally. Yeah. Wow.
So at any rate, and just as a general principle, I spent some time with TRG people in New Orleans, marketing consultants, and they're all about targeted marketing, which I truly believed. I was convinced by that, and so that's we don't do a lot of mass marketing. We do spend our time trying to target people that we feel are more likely to want to consume our product, because we're not a mass market vehicle. Right. If we ever got to 5% market penetration, we wouldn't know what to do with it.
Sure.
So if you spend money on something that's a mass marketing vehicle, you have to think, well, 95% plus of the people that see this are not going to consume this product.
Yeah. And
so just if you think about that, the way the mass marketing products are priced, just they're priced to get to everybody. Mm-hmm. And with such a niche kind of product as we have, it's just too expensive. So we spend more time on targeted marketing. Okay. And I think most orchestras are going in that direction to one degree or another.
Okay. What are some other commonalities with different, or I don't know how much contact you have with other executive directors, but you've obviously been in this for a while now in different organizations. Like what are some of the other, what are some of the other things that people are struggling with, or where's the art form or the orchestras as a whole? What trends are you seeing over these years that you've been in the business?
I mentioned a minute ago that subscriptions are still a large part of our revenue, but that's a model. It's still true, but it's a model that's under siege.
Okay.
Because people are less and less disposed to pre-commit to a large number of events.
Right.
And so there's been a lot of a steady drop off in subscription revenue. Arts organizations love subscriptions because you have guaranteed income and you have a much lower cost to sell those tickets than you do single tickets.
Sure.
So the more it goes towards single tickets and away from subscriptions, the more we have to spend on marketing, mm-hmm. which is not particularly where anybody wants to spend their money. You want to spend it on product to the greatest extent possible. But we have been holding relatively steady, but still seeing in some years a little bit of a drop off, and that's not just a threat to orchestras. It's a threat to opera companies and theaters and ballet companies, and everybody's seeing the same thing, and that's a challenge. At the same time, the debate about that balance I was talking about rages unabated.
Right.
I mean, some groups, like their contemporary music ensembles, they've got a very obvious mission, to play contemporary music. There's no question about that. But more, if you're in a town like Shreveport that only has one orchestra, you can't have those niche players. Like a place like San Francisco obviously has tons of niche players.
Right, exactly.
Because you've got the big dog, and then you've got tons of niche players. And that's great, in a place that can support that. But in a place that only has one orchestra, you have to decide kind of what your artistic profile is, and that's not a debate that I think is ever going to go away.
Right. I think something you also mentioned earlier, the challenge of having an angel, right, writing the checks for a group, and I think that happens to so many groups, and of course you can become dependent on that, and then that vanishes, and you're in a real financial pickle. Like, is there anything that people or organizations can do? Maybe they have an angel right now writing the checks. What can people do to guard against that? That disappearing? Is there anything you've discovered or anything you see just in terms of setting yourself up for when that does disappear?
Well, interestingly enough, I have never worked directly in a place at a time when the angel was there.
Okay.
I've only worked in the aftermath of when the angel disappeared. And I mean, in a way, it's easy to say you need to diversify your revenue sources.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, that's the obvious thing. The harder thing is to do it, and so you basically always need to be trying to pay attention to your existing supporters. At all levels, because somebody who's giving you $250 today might be the person that could give you $10,000 next year if they were appropriately engaged.
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of trying to find. I think again now it's also a truism that nobody has enough people or enough hours in the day to do the ultimate job.
Right.
Like, for instance, this orchestra, we're running with about 40% of the staff that the orchestra had in the year 2000. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to do the same tasks on a slightly smaller scale, but the same tasks with a lot fewer people. And I think that's true pretty much everywhere. The staff numbers are largely being pushed down.
Sure.
as I say, even I will agree that, to the extent you can, you want to spend your money on product. So I agree with that. But the net result of that is that the number of staff hours keeps getting pushed down. And so given the fact that that's a given, that you have less time than you need to have, you need to prioritize your time and try to use your time in the ways that are going to create the most results. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, that means I have to be the wet blanket. Somebody will come up with an idea for an internet contest, like for Facebook likes. Yeah. And I think, no, no, I'm sorry. It's just not a good use of time. Yeah. We had the VP of development for the Detroit Symphony do a board retreat for us one time, and he had a slide that said, "Don't waste your time on low margin activities." Mm. And the slide before that was, "Time is not a renewable resource." And I thought, I love these. Yeah. This is great. Totally. But, so that's it. So you have to identify the most productive ways to use your time and try to, I have tried to the extent I can to use the kind of targeting analogy with donors as well as ticket buyers to say, okay, let's identify the people who are the best prospects to move up the spectrum of donors. Yeah. I can't say that I'm a genius in fundraising by any means. I think we've done okay. I think perhaps, nobody lasts forever. When I'm not here anymore, if the next person has more of a stronger revenue background than I do, it might be a good thing. Mm-hmm. But that would be appropriate to the time in the organization. Yeah. I think they needed somebody like me when I started, but they might not need somebody like me every time.
Right. Well, they how lucky they obviously have been to have had you at that time and still have you. So that's it's remarkable. Obviously it's all worked out very well, and I'm sure people are so happy to have you in that organization.
Well, I hope so.
I'm sure. I'd love to and thank. And speaking of time and renewable resources, just thank you for chatting. This is super fun, and it's just like one of the delights of doing a podcast like this. Is like I would have wanted to sit down and chat with you and catch up and hear what you're doing anyway. And so it's fun to be able to do that and then put it out to the world so people can hear it.
Yeah, I wish I had time. We had time for me to ask you how you're doing, apart from what I heard. But
we'll find time for that in the future, I'm sure. I do want to, if we could hit one more thing. I usually wrap up with some sort of advice for young people out there, or advice you might give yourself if you went back to 17, 18-year-old Lois. I'd love to, you brought up Pathways, that program, and maybe just. A lot of young people listen, people of all ages listen to this, but a lot of young people listen to this, like 16, 17-year-old, 18-year-olds, people that are figuring out what they want to do. And let's say someone's listening to this and is thinking about a career in the arts. You mentioned, how for so many years, music schools, it's like you're either in the Cleveland Orchestra or you're nothing, right? That hopefully that's changing. Right. But what might you tell some of those young people or their parents? We have a lot of parents that listen. What might you tell them just about options in the arts right now?
Well, as you said, it's not an all or nothing proposition. Mm-hmm. There are ways you develop skills in the arts that are very applicable to help you succeed in any number of places. So I went straight from music school to law school, and it was fine. It was fine. And so for parents who might think, oh, well, this is money thrown down the drain if their kid wants to go to into an arts program, either they will get into the Cleveland Orchestra, which is great. That's one way to succeed, or they can use the skills they learn the intuitive and listening and high brain function skills that you learn in arts can help you in any number of ways, in any number of pursuits. And also to the kids, as I said before, give yourself permission to feel successful in any number of ways. There's not just one definition of success, and don't feel like you have got to run completely from the field if you can't get into the Cleveland Orchestra.
Yeah. Obviously, there's so many paths to success. Like here you are, legal career, and then through these orchestras and executive directing. Shreveport. My wife went to music school. She's a doctor now. That didn't close any doors for her. So it's not
exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of and even if you have a job and you feel like you'd like to expand into other things too, I'd say, go ahead and do it, because you never know what's around the corner. I would have never expected to wind up where I am, but here I am, and it's working out well for us.
Lois, thank you so much for chatting. So great to reconnect, and what a great journey she's on and she's been through with these different organizations, and so cool to catch up with a colleague from so many years ago and see how well she's doing in the music world. If this is your first episode or your 486th episode or anywhere in between, I just want to say thank you for listening to the show. If you ever want to reach out, feedback@contrabassconversations.com will put you in touch with me. I love hearing from folks. I've heard from people all across the globe and gotten so many great recommendations for the show from people out there listening to the show. So thank you. If you ever want to say hi, that's a great way to do it. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Moehring. If you're looking for a great bass, Mitch is making them in the Dallas area. Learn more at mitchmoehring.com. And I'd like to welcome a new member to the team, Krista Copper, who is archiving and cataloging all these great conversations, finding topics for us to dig into on future best of episodes. So thank you, Krista, so much for that. I'm your host, Jason Heath, coming to you each and every week from San Francisco, California, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.